Kia ora koutou and welcome to 3 Minute Board Games Top 100 for 2021. Now 2021's been a bit of an odd year for me. You might notice there's a small goblin attached to me. Well, she came along earlier this year and I've played a lot less games this year than I have in the past, so the list hasn't moved as much as it has in previous years. While that might sound like bad news for the channel, it's good news in a way because in a month's time I'm going to be the stay-at-home parent. That's right, I'm going to be looking after this one as well as doing the channel. That's going to be my job. Doing YouTube videos and looking after a baby. So the usual disclaimers are in place for our top 100. This is my list. It is prepared by me. It is games I like. It is highly influenced by what I have played and what I want to play. There might be games that I've really liked in the past that I've got absolutely no interest in playing now. That hurts their ratings. If a game gets played more often, there's a good chance that its ratings going to improve. If I've just picked up a game, I've played it a couple of times, and I like it, it might not make this top 100 until a year or two in. And while you are entitled to your opinion about what is a good game or not, the fact is, this top 100 is my top 100. And it doesn't really matter what your opinion is, you can't really change what I think. Although, I do like it when people see this list and suggest games that they think I would like. And I've discovered a lot of great games that way. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be the stay-at-home parent for Anne coming up, and that means my sole source of income is whatever Steph brings in from her job, plus whatever the channel makes. So, help keep 3 Minute Board Games going. We don't do paid content, we don't do ads, we don't do Kickstarter promos and stuff. We don't do all the stuff that gets you money in this. We try to make a free-to-air channel because we want open and accessible games. We don't want to do marketing. And therefore, we are supported by our sponsors, Miniature Market, YouTube revenue, which isn't a huge amount, and our backers on Patreon. And I have to thank all our backers on Patreon. If it wasn't for you, this channel wouldn't be operating, and I certainly wouldn't be the one staying at home to look after Anne and to make more content. And throughout this video, you're going to see comments from some of our backers. I asked them to put down a couple of words about games that are on this list, and those will appear on the screen. So without further delay, so this one can get to bed, let's get to the list. First up we have Caverna, the worker placement game about dwarves, mining and farming. A deep and immensely replayable worker placement game, which sadly has not hit the table in a number of years. They really need to release a 4-player version instead of the overpriced 7-player version. The Networks, a light-hearted and ridiculous card drafting game. The high point of this one for me is the silly humour contained within it. But don't get me wrong, it's not just a silly game. It's a solid competitive experience, especially with the expansion that adds in variable player powers. Nemo's War 2nd Edition, a compelling solo game where you play Captain Nemo, sailing across all 7 seas and all the oceans, exploring and blowing up things. A hybrid optimization and storytelling game that plays differently based on what motivation you pick for Nemo. Tyrants of the Underdark, an area control and deck building game where you actually get to do stuff with your deck rather than just get more cards for it. The art and components are so-so, but the gameplay loop is exceptional. Star Wars Imperial Assault, still the best version of Descent on the market, with the added advantage of being Star Wars and not that weird fantasy setting Fantasy Flight Games loves. Sadly, this one's heading out of print, and I'm not sure if we'll see a 2nd edition. Imperial Spells and Steam, one of the very first train games I ever played that I didn't hate. It's probably overproduced and excessively expensive for what it is, but I guess that's also part of the charm of this game. The components are ridiculous and over the top, but it's also a magical train game, and that's cool. King of Tokyo Dark Edition. For me, the definitive version of King of Tokyo. This is a great looking, casual friendly battle game that does not overstay its welcome. Chaos in the Old World, Eric Lang's original masterpiece, whose design heavily influenced Rising Sun and Blood Rage. But in this one, you get to play the 4 Chaos Gods from the Warhammer setting. And it perfectly captures just how different those 4 gods are and their interactions. Another one that is sadly out of print and probably never coming back. Star Realms, a light, simple and fast deck building game where players are opposing battle fleets. The rapidity of its play and the ease of teaching it is why this remains a popular game for me. Villages, a small box game with iconic art and a unique style. This is a drafting and set collection game, and it plays fast and crams a lot of decisions into its time. Last Friday, a hidden movement game based on the slasher films like Friday the 13th. What sets this apart from other hidden movement games for me is that it goes back and forth. There are 4 different chapters, and each chapter has different rules. And sometimes the masked killer is on the back foot. And it's the mid-game tempo change that I really like in Last Friday. Also, I'm a massive horror fan. Hostage Negotiator, a quick playing dice and card management game where you're a hostage negotiator trying to talk down a terrorist. What makes this game stand out is that each of the abductors works really differently. This one's fallen a bit because of career mode, which paradoxically, while making it a deeper and richer game experience to play career mode, it's also just made it that much more effort to set up and play. Twilight Imperium 4th Edition. I love the idea of Twilight Imperium and its massive scale and scope. And I have had fun playing this game, but the reason it keeps slipping down my ratings is that just about every time I play, the game takes way too long. Because you can negotiate at every point in the game, all it takes is a couple of players talking in circles and you waste hours and hours. That said, it remains on the top 100 because when I play with people who don't muck about, it is an amazing experience. Root, the cute and cuddly counterinsurgency game. Root is adorably murderous and features furry forest friends in a fight to the death. Where it stands out is the total asymmetry in the various factions. And while I got tired of playing it with the original 4 factions, adding more into the mix has really improved the experience for me. It's a lot less predictable when you don't just play the 4 original factions. XCOM, the board game. This game is Panic in a Box, a real-time co-op game where each player is a different function within the Earth Defense Force. Messages come in from the app and you have to respond in real time and make a bunch of snap decisions. Super thematic and one of my all-time favorite solo experiences. Dune. And to be clear, this is the 2019 reprint of Dune, not the other Dune games that are out there, because there's a lot now. While this has some of the problems that I mentioned with Twilight Imperium of different players taking too long, my longest game of Dune is half as long as my longest game of Twilight Imperium. And it covers a lot of the same ground. Diplomacy, betrayal, violence, it's all in there. As well as the radically different asymmetric powers I also loved in Root. I still think this is the best Dune game on the market. Android Netrunner. The best competitive CCG ever made in my opinion. But sadly, not one I get the opportunity to play very often. I know it's been resurrected with the Nisai group and that there are new cards coming out and there are people to play with, but I don't know any locally. And it's just such a hard game to teach to new players. If this was still being supported properly and there were still people I could play locally, there's no doubt it would be much higher on my list. And I just love the world it is set in. Legendary Alien. The one legendary game I've played that I've really enjoyed. And I think that's because the encounter system is tailor-made for the Aliens experience. The enemy cards advancing through the air ducts towards you is just super thematic, and it works just as well as a low player co-op or as a solo game. Plus, it's Aliens, and I'm a sucker for anything connected to that franchise. Martians, A Story of Civilization. The game with the worst rulebook I've ever read. That said, once you get past the terrible rulebook, or you use the fan one on BGG, this is an excellent worker placement game. And it's one that's consistently flown under the radar. Probably very hard to get these days because it wasn't a very successful Kickstarter, and very few people other than me seem to like it. But for me, this is the best worker placement game set on Mars. And by that, I mean it's better than on Mars. Churchill, a truly unique game experience. A World War II game that isn't based on units and movement and tactics, but based on the negotiation between the 3 allied powers. This one is less about winning the war and more about shaping the peace. And that creates a truly unique experience. Another one of those games that's pretty difficult to teach though, and people really have to get into the idea of negotiating, diplomacy, and compromise that is baked into this game. Scythe. The iconic big box game about mechs stomping around 1920s Europe. Scythe takes a lot of different game elements and somehow combines them into a good game experience. It's also stunning to look at on the table, and every point in the game there are decisions to make, things to optimize, and risks to manage. For some wargamers, it's not wargamey enough, and for some Eurogamers, it's too confrontational, but for me, it hits that perfect sweet spot of allowing you to have a bit of biff, but not making the whole game about that. Freedom, the Underground Railroad. A compelling and intriguing co-op game that tackles a very sensitive subject with tact and grace. It's also an exceptional puzzle to solve, as you have extremely limited actions and really have to plan out your moves. If you're comfortable with the subject matter, I recommend playing it. And if you're uncomfortable with the subject matter, I highly recommend playing it. Galilean Moons. For 3 years I said this was the best area control game you haven't played, and well, now it's out. And I still think it's one of the best area control games I've personally ever played. I love the emergent gameplay in it, I love the simple core rules, and I love the really clever thing it does with regions and action cards. This game deserves way more hype. Android. The game that built the setting that Android Netrunner is set in. If Ticket to Ride is a pop song, then Android is a 90-minute long progressive rock concept album. There are so many mechanics in this game, so many ideas, and it's so creative, but it is a bit of a janky mess at times. But I love it for its ambition, and I love that it's clearly a passion project, and something that Kevin Wilson poured his heart and soul into. And while this has been out of print for ages, it is one of those games I recommend trying to track down and play just once, just to experience its full craziness once in your lifetime. Spheres of Influence. One of my great board gaming regrets is I don't own a copy of this game and probably never will. Simply put, this is better Risk. It took the basic game of Risk and just modernized it and made it 100 times better. And one of the things that consistently annoys me about Kickstarter is great games getting one run and then disappearing. This is a game that could definitely come back, and I think a lot of people would enjoy it. Modern Art, the quintessential auction game. Art is essentially worthless, and this game takes that idea and builds it into the gameplay. Art is only worth what you're willing to pay for it. So you try to create demand for this hot new artist and drive up the bidding in order to pad your own pockets. If you only own one pure auction game, it should probably be Modern Art. Pavlov's House, a solo-only game about the Battle of Stalingrad. This game expertly blends the strategic level of operations in the city with the individual actions inside Pavlov's house, zooming back and forth from the divisional to the personal level through the turn. And I think that's just neat. I never thought that would be workable in a game, and I love how it's done in Pavlov's house. Truly an exceptional solo game. Lords of Hellas, a wonderfully over-the-top area control game with emergent player powers. Lords of Hellas has multiple paths to victory, including one that just involves having your hero hunt down giant monsters. Sadly, this one suffers a little bit from Kickstarter bloat because the core game's a lot of fun, but once you get all the extras, it becomes a bit unwieldy and unmanageable. And general advice, sometimes the core box of a game is all you really need. Space Cadets, the zany co-op game about being the bridge crew on a ship like Star Trek's Enterprise. Unfortunately, you're more like the crew from Red Dwarf. Watch as your friends fumble and stumble, point the ship the wrong way, angle the shields where they shouldn't be, and absolutely 100% fail to hit with the photon torpedoes. A wacky experience that's worth a lot of laughs. But weirdly, when you get good at this game, and you can actually get good at this game, it's surreal seeing the ship's crew function perfectly. So it's really two games in one box. One where you're an incompetent crew that don't know what you're doing and it's worth a lot of laughs. And then when you're a competent crew, it's actually a legit fun bridge combat simulator. Cthulhu Wars. Speaking of games that have dramatic Kickstarter bloat, I can't think of a single game that has a worse problem with that than Cthulhu Wars. You need a shipping crate to store all the extra stuff. And having played with a bunch of it, most of it is worthless. The core game and the different factions, however, are fantastic. Cthulhu Wars does a lot of what Chaos in the Old World does, but does it a little bit better. And while I'm absolutely in love with the core gameplay and the asymmetry of the different factions, as soon as I see all the extras coming out, I just want to run away. So if you are thinking of buying Cthulhu Wars, get the core box, maybe some of the factions, and don't worry about the rest of the guff. The Isle of Cats. This game is about stacking cats on a ship. And it's a ridiculous premise, but somehow it works. And not only does it work, it's excellent. There are so many emerging paths to victory in this one, so many little decisions you have to make, and it's one of the first tessellation games I've played that I've really gotten into. Plus it also comes with a family-friendly mode, which means it's not just a game for grognards and serious gamers. The Space Agency game goes in 3 stages, starting with colonizing the inner worlds and moving on to interstellar colonization at the end of the game. I love that you can play any of the 3 parts by themselves. After playing this game the first couple of times, I wished it had variable player powers, so I'm really interested to pick up the expansion which adds that stuff in. This is a neat game, and not as complex as it initially appears. Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This is a great game about building wacky castles, and I really love its scoring system, and how so many different castle and room layouts can work for you. One of those games where the thing you build isn't the same every game. I'm not a huge fan of the architect system in it, where one player sets the price of the parts each turn, but aside from that minor quibble, this is an excellent castle building game. Lords of Waterdeep, tricking D&D players into playing a Euro game since whenever it came out. Lords of Waterdeep isn't the most innovative game, and one could definitely argue that it's a Euro game with this very thin D&D veneer, and yet somehow it still works really well. It has tight worker placement rules, building locations that modify the game as you play, and a reasonable amount of interaction for a worker placement game. All said and done, this is an incredibly dependable worker placement game that a lot of people will enjoy, and that I enjoy a bunch. Dead of Winter. While not my favorite co-op game with a trader element to it, I still have a lot of love for Dead of Winter. And it really comes alive if you download the app that has all of the cards narrated on it. Then you turn on the app, put on your speaker, and let the narrator guide you through the story. And that really elevates it from a good game to a great game. I have some issues with its tonal shifts, where one encounter will be about dead babies, and the next one will be about Sparky the Wonder Dog. But even with that minor quibble, this is a deep, immersive co-op game that has an optional trader element. So okay, Above and Below, one of the best looking games in my collection, and Ryan Lockett's art style is just absolutely wonderful. Above and Below combines worker placement and narrative, which is not something you see very often. And that combination creates a game that's both competitive, but also quite heartwarming, engaging, and interesting. I continue to love this game because it breathes a little bit of magic and whimsy into the worker placement genre, which can sometimes be quite sterile and dry. Architects of the West Kingdom. What sets Architects apart from many other worker placement games is it scales incredibly well. If anything, this is a worker placement game that works best at 4 or 5 players, whereas many other worker placement games grind to a crawl when you've got about 5 players. Its rapidity of play and its constantly cycling of workers creates a really unique experience. And despite excelling at high player counts, it also has a pretty good solo mode as well. The Reckoners. Another one of those games that looks like an overhyped, overpackaged Kickstarter game. But the reality is, this is a super tight and super clever co-op game. One of the things I love about this one is that players take their actions at the same time, so you can chain moves back and forth. And the key to winning the game is that collaboration. Having your character take one action that boosts another player so they can do something and then you follow up. It's how you tag team your moves in the Reckoners that makes a difference. And while that sounds like an alpha gaming nightmare, if you have the right group, it absolutely hums. I've not read the fiction this is based on, but I've played the game with several people who have, who say that it's an excellent adaptation as well. Sentinels of the Multiverse. This cooperative card game, where each superhero is its own predefined deck, is in my opinion the best superhero game on the market. Sentinels has so much depth, with all of its expansions, and especially if you add in the Cauldron, the fan expansion as well. There's just so much to explore. It's one of those games that if this was the only game you played, you could still have thousands and thousands of hours of enjoyment. Each hero is a different set of skills to master, and each villain a different set of challenges. And coming up with ways to combine the different heroes to overcome the challenges of each individual villain, well, it's safe to say you can just keep playing this game and have a hell of a lot of fun. Rurik, Dawn of Kiev. If you are a fan of Scythe, I highly recommend picking up Rurik. While being its own game and quite distinct from Scythe, it scratches a lot of the same itches. It also has this fantastic action programming system, which is truly innovative and an absolute mind bender when you play. Lots of decisions, fast paced, and a pretty gorgeous game as well. The Crew. I used to hate trick-taking games. I'm still not very good at trick-taking games, but The Crew is a trick-taking game that I not only am good at, but I absolutely adore. The Crew is a co-op trick-taking game, and it staggers me that this didn't exist earlier. It's such a simple idea, and yet I hadn't seen it before The Crew came out, and it works so well. This is the kind of game you can play over and over and over again with a group. Century, Golem Edition. Splendor is an incredibly popular game, but I totally got rid of my copy after playing Century Golem Edition. It occupies the same game space, but I think it does it a lot better than Splendor does. It also has really neat components and art. It's easy to teach, and arguably a close to perfect short game. I've liked it so much that I've picked up its 2 sequels, and I'm really keen to see how they work as well. And definitely get the Golem Edition over the Classic Edition, because it just looks 10 times better. Pandemic, The Cure. The dice-based version of Pandemic that is somehow more fun for me to play and also far more frustrating. That's probably why it's more fun. The thing I really love about this one is that the characters come with their own sets of dice and those dice are unique. And each character feels distinct and different in how they play. There's also a push your luck element to the game that is absolutely brutal. That said, it's definitely better with the expansion when you've got a much bigger pool of characters to draw from. Museum. This is a card drafting set collection game about building a museum collection. There's a lot to love in Museum, from its beautiful art to the fact they address the idea that stealing stuff and putting it in a museum isn't necessarily popular with the people you're taking it from. But probably my favorite thing in the whole game is that you can buy stuff from people's discards. And that opens up some wacky player interactions that I haven't seen in many games. Another game where I got all the expansions, but still prefer to play with the core set though. But wow, does it look glorious when it's fully set up on the table. And there's something inherently satisfying about building a big collection. Agents of Smersh. So I don't back many games on Kickstarter, but I immediately back the reboot of this one that's coming out, hopefully next year. Agents of Smersh is a story game, and I love story games, and this is a very, very, very deep story game. There are thousands of encounters in the book, and it's all done in that classic James Bond, Austin Powers, cheesy 60s spy shtick, as you and the other players are trying to take down Dr. Lobo, who is not Dr. Evil, but he's basically Dr. Evil. But first you have to get through his henchmen. It's super gonzo, and it's a game you play for the stories more than actually winning the game. But it's one of those games that whenever it hits the table, there's always lots of laughs. Dawn of the Zeds. Possibly the most unforgiving and merciless game I own. Every time I play it, it absolutely kicks my ass. And if I do win, it's by the skin of my teeth. This is a solo game that can be played co-op about defending a town from a zombie attack. And it's always tense. You never have enough actions. You never have enough resources to keep everyone alive. So it's all about making painful decisions and managing your resources to mitigate all the risk that you have. But there are a few games out there that create more memorable moments than Dawn of the Zeds. Still, the less said about the rulebook, the better. Potion Explosion. While I tend to gravitate towards narrative games and heavy games, I love things like Potion Explosion as well. There's something immensely satisfying about pulling the marbles out of the dispenser and having them clack together and creating these chain reactions. It's also casual friendly and another easy game to teach, while still having enough in it to appeal to more serious gamers like myself. And there are a few things in gaming I find more satisfying than a massive turn in Potion Explosion, where you create chain reactions and use potions to do a whole bunch of things. Le Havre. For me, this is one of the great engine building games, and it's crammed full of tight decisions that have huge impacts later on in the game. You start off small, scrambling to feed your family with whatever fish and bread you can scrounge up. But by the end of the game, you're commanding a fleet of steel ships and sending them out laden down with cargo. Definitely one for the serious gamers though, as bad decisions in your first few turns can have consequences later on. Junk Art. I've never really got into dexterity games. They're not really my jam, but Junk Art 100% is. This is a game about stacking things, piling them up high, these irregular shapes that really don't look like they should be stacked on top of each other. And it's tense and hilarious. And there's something immensely satisfying about getting things right in Junk Art and having this giant teetering sculpture that you're putting the last piece on. And if it collapses, everyone laughs at you. But if it holds, you feel awesome. Crisis. This game is set in a near future with a collapsing economy. It's a worker placement game where you're trying to make as much money as possible while riding the economy down. And one of the things I really like about this game is it's an economic game where upwards growth isn't a constant. And you have to make some interesting decisions about whether you want to prop the economy up or profiteer from it collapsing. Also, an incredibly unforgiving game that punishes mistakes. And I kind of love that about it. Robinson Crusoe. Speaking of unforgiving games that punish mistakes, Robinson Crusoe is a co-op game about surviving on an isolated island. And while it is a co-op, I've never played it co-op. I almost exclusively play this one solo. And it's a great solo experience. This game will kick your ass over and over again, but when you do win, there is a great feeling of triumph in finally beating the game. Plus loads of scenarios that let you explore the mechanics of the game in different ways. Horrified. One of many pandemic-inspired cooperative games on the market. But what sets Horrified apart for me is it does what it does so damn well. It's presented beautifully, it has a novel take on the pandemic-style firefighting co-op mechanics, and each of the monsters does change up the game a little. An incredibly family-friendly game as well, but enough there to keep serious gamers interested. I've not yet tried its sequel, American Monsters, but honestly, that holds a lot less interest to me. The Universal monsters are ubiquitous. The American monsters, I don't really connect with. Sidereal Confluence. One of the most original and innovative games I've ever played. This is unlike any other game on the market. 4 to 9 players playing different alien races with fundamentally different economies, different wants and needs. Every economy has big holes in it, and the other players are there to fill those gaps. So it's a game about mutually beneficial trades. Now I have the Wharekemu set up, I'm thinking of hosting a 9-player game in Sidereal Confluence every year as a sort of mini convention. This is a game I really want to play a lot more than I've been able to. And I'd really only recommend it for people who have big gaming groups, because you need at least 5 or 6 players to get the right energy at the table to make this game feel right. Santorini. The funny thing about Santorini is it comes with all these variable player powers that change the game up, but we very rarely play with those because the core game itself, with no modifiers, is just excellent. It's a fast and quick to play chess-like experience, and you can teach it to practically anyone. And what continues to impress me about Santorini is that core game system. It's so good and so solid, and you can replay it till the end of time. Power Grid. An oldie but a goodie. This is a game where you buy power plants at auction, procure the resources to run them, and then try to power the biggest grid that you can. Loads of decisions to be made in this game, and one that I've enjoyed every time it's hit the table, regardless of what map we're using. Power Grid is an example of a game that endures. Kolejka. This is a game created in Poland about the experiences at the end of the Cold War, where the communist regime within Poland was collapsing and there were chronic shortages everywhere. It's designed as a teaching tool to teach you about the farcical nature of that period. And as a result, it's this amazing mix of dark comedy and excellent gameplay, as your family members desperately queue up to get the things you need, and you manipulate the queues by lying about someone's political orientation or borrowing someone's baby so you can jump the queue. I believe this one's really hard to get these days, which is sad. Defenders of the Last Stand. I have a soft spot for games that are a bit of a rambling mess. Games like Android and Defenders of the Last Stand. There's too many mechanics in Last Stand. There's too much going on. But for some reason I find the random hodgepodge of mechanics, its pandemic style gameplay mixed with Arkham Horror style encounters and characters, just really entertaining. Now, is it the fairest and most balanced game ever? Hell no. But what it is a random and chaotic experience. And I kind of love it for that. I'm really excited to see Freedom 5 when it comes out because it takes a lot from Defenders of the Last Stand and puts it in the Sentinels of the Multiverse universe. I've played the demo of that, really liked it, looking forward to seeing the full game. Black Orchestra. Now this initially looks like another one of those pandemic firefighting co-op games, just with a very dark and different theme. However, it plays really differently. In a lot of co-ops, there's stuff happening every turn that you've got to fight. There's either viruses or fires or whatever, and you've got to run around and put them out. In Black Orchestra, it's about biding your time. It's about setting up an assassination of Hitler at just the right moment. And the game comes down to a single decisive point. Now, whether you'll love the game does come down to if the idea of a single dice roll to decide a game is a really good or a really bad thing to you. I think it's really good because it is different. It also models a conspiracy really well. People have to build up the courage to take these kind of decisive and life-threatening actions. Blood Bowl Team Manager. I've said it before many times on the channel, but I'm not a huge fan of deck building as a mechanic in and of itself. Where I like it is where you can do something with that deck building. And Blood Bowl Team Manager is one of those games where the deck building is just part of the game. And in here, you're playing highlights and simulating sports matches. And it does feel like a team manager game. Sadly, another one of those games that's out of print and probably never coming back, but I think this is a game space that could be explored in other games. So if someone wants to kind of knock off Blood Bowl Team Manager and do it a little differently, I think I'd be okay with that. Arkham Horror, the card game. The closest thing you'll get to a role-playing game experience playing a card game. I haven't played this one in quite a while because committing to a campaign is a serious amount of time, but the full campaigns of it I have played were some of the best experiences in gaming I've had. Arkham Horror really lets you create your own unique character, then take them on an adventure with other players' characters that feels like a legitimate adventure, full of discovery. And we will finally be doing a 3-minute recap of Arkham Horror the card game when my 2nd edition copy arrives. Everdell. The giant tree and cutesy cards sometimes obscure the fact that Everdell is mechanically a really solid game. It's a solid worker placement and set collection game that also just happens to be really pretty. I've really enjoyed the Pearlbrook expansion as well, and we play with that every time we play now. Still haven't tried the other 2 expansions. They seem pretty expensive for what they are. Cicadian's First Light. A dice worker placement game with one of the best solo modes out there. One of the things I really love about Cicadians is that each of your leader powers is incredibly strong and therefore opens up different play avenues each time you play a different leader. This is one of the best games Garfield Games has put out, but because it's not Noun of the direction Noun, it's flown somewhat under the radar. If you do like games like the North Sea and West Kingdom trilogies, definitely check out Cicadian's First Light. I think it's one of the best games they've made, and I'm looking forward to seeing the 2nd edition. Suburbia. This is a classic tile placement city building game, and one of the few games I actually forked out to get the collector's edition for. And I slightly regret that because there's a lot in the collector's edition I just don't use. The core game and the first expansion are really 95% of the usable content. The second expansion's a bit naff. I really like it because it's a game crammed full of decisions. Every tile purchase and placement dramatically impacts how your city evolves and how you score points. However, the game can grind to a halt with people who are slow with math. That said, I'm fast with math, so I absolutely love it. Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. Possibly the game I have played the most on the table with several hundred players. Arkham Horror occupies a special place in my heart because many years ago when I had heart problems and had to stay off work for a year, it was the one solo game I had and kept me company that year. And I still enjoy playing it even today. I vastly prefer 2nd Edition Arkham Horror to Eldritch Horror, which I thought was okay, but not for me, and Arkham Horror 3rd Edition, which really missed for me. And arguably, Arkham Horror 2nd Edition is the most influential co-op in history alongside Pandemic. And if you want to know a lot more about Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, I did a deep dive video on this where I interviewed the designers of Arkham 1st, 2nd, and 3rd editions. That video is called Arkham Horror The Rear View. Empires of the Void 2. This game remains consistently high on my list because it promised to be a Twilight Imperium type experience in only 2 hours, and it kinda is. You can research technologies, conquer planets, build a fleet, build a massive army, go on battles, do all that stuff that you can do in Twilight Imperium in a lot less time. Now, it's not going to be the same kind of experience as you get in a big game like TI, but I get to play Empires of the Void a lot more often. It's a wonderful world. This futuristic engine building game does a spectacular job of cramming so many decisions into its really short playtime. This game is engine building distilled to its absolute finest point, and you'll find that the 4 turns just fly by. I'm not sure I know a game that keeps me as engaged for its entire duration, because It's a Wonderful World is just decision after decision, and I love that about it. The Captain is Dead. Yep, this is another one of those firefighting co-ops, but this is one of my favorites of them. The Captain is Dead takes the best elements of a firefighting co-op, of tough decisions, a tense timer, and characters that have wildly different abilities, so each time you play you can think, how am I going to solve this puzzle differently? And it does that with a theme that is a beautiful homage to Star Trek. Plus, I just really like its distinctive art style. Been playing this one on the app a fair bit lately as well. Between Two Cities. The city building game is about positive interactions. In each game, you are trying to build 2 cities. The one to your left, you build with the person on your left, and the one to your right, you build with the person on your right. And each city is collaboratively built. This alone makes it a game I'll keep in my collection, because you can play this with inexperienced people, and it's really easy to teach, and the interactions are all positive. It is a great way to introduce people to hobby gaming. If I have one slight bugbear with it, the scoring system makes the games a little artificially close at times. Millennium Blades. Like Sidereal Confluence, this is one of those games that is truly novel and unique. And also like Sidereal Confluence, it's a game I don't get to play remotely enough. In this one, you are a character in a TV show about collecting cards. Like you're the protagonist in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or a Magic the Gathering TV show. There's real-time trading, card collecting, and then playing combos like you are playing a deck of cards from a CCG. And even if you're not into the anime art style, this is just a wonderful, clever, unique, and interesting game. Chinatown. My top candidate for a great game that really needs a reskin. This is also a bit like Sidereal Confluence and Between Two Cities, where it's all about positive interactions and trades. You control some building plots and some shops, and you want to trade and sell those in order to make your own businesses more profitable. This is a great game for good table talk and high energy, wheeling and dealing, and people saying, tell him he's dreaming. The perfect game to kick off a high energy games night. Spartacus. A game that's part engine building, part wheeling and dealing and backstabbing, and part battles in the arena. Spartacus is an odd fish, but it's one of those games that with the right group comes alive. If your group gets into the idea of betting and gambling on the fights in the arena, and all of the backstab and betrayal in the intrigue round, this can be a fantastic tabletop experience. Few games are more ripe for a curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal moment than Spartacus. This one's been recently reprinted, and I reviewed the reprint, but I personally am keeping my old version of the game, which has the original TV series art in it. I just prefer that. Healthy Heart Hospital, a game I really want a 2nd edition to come out of. Mostly because the game I've got at the moment is a little falling to bits. And the reason for that is it gets played so often. Healthy Heart Hospital is one of my all-time favorite solo games. Now technically it's a co-op, but it's one of those co-ops that just feels better as a solo. The core of this game is bag manipulation. Every time you take cubes out from the bag, you can put some back in, changing the color and complexion of what's in the bag. And it's manipulating those outcomes to make really decisive actions late in your turn. That is the key to this game being really enjoyable to me. What can I say? I love card counting, I love cube counting. The Castles of Burgundy. Alright, you Stefan Feld fans, you can back off now. There's a Stefan Feld game in my top 100. And yes, it's the Castles of Burgundy. I got taught this one about 18 months ago, and it's grown on me. And it's grown on me a lot. Such a simple core to this game. Roll 2 dice, take the matching actions. And yet each time you do that, there are so many decisions to be made. I think the best way to describe Castles of Burgundy is that it's an elegant design. It's not an elegant looking game, but this is an example where looks shouldn't really matter. The gameplay is what brings you here. And the gameplay is what keeps you interested in a game long after the wowie art has faded. This is one ugly, beautiful game. Energy Empire. Energy Empire is simply a great engine building game, where you bounce back and forth between expanding your engine and generating power. And it's picking that cadence and doing it right that allows you to excel at this game. Lots of paths to victory, and lots of different things you can do within the engine as well. A really clever game, and one that I've enjoyed every time I've played. Leaving Earth. This is one of the more complex games I've got, but I feel it's a game that needed to be that complex. It's a love letter to the space programs. It's about sending probes into space, landing people on the moon, or Mars, or Ceres, and doing a whole bunch of different missions around the solar system. And what I love is there's so many ways you can go about doing things in this game. You can build big space stations and slowly move them around. You can rely on slow ion boosters. Or you can just strap things to Saturn rockets and fire them into space. And the risk system in this game is absolutely genius. Leaving Earth is a passion project for someone who clearly loves the space program and the idea of space exploration. And if you love those things, definitely check it out. Paladins of the West Kingdom. Paladins of the West Kingdom is the crunchiest of the Garfield games, and it's the one I enjoy the most. It's an engine building game at its heart, and every turn you're getting more and more resources that you want to chain together to give you more and more points. It has a lot of different sub-mechanics in it as well, and they all integrate really well. Definitely one for the serious gamers out there though. It's a lot less casual friendly than say Architects of the West Kingdom. Also has a killer solo mode. 7 Wonders. This game has sold a bazillion copies for a reason. It's really good. It's a card drafting game that scales beautifully from 3 to 7 players. And the decisions you take have to take into account what the players to your right and left are doing. And I love that it creates these little microclimates where your actions impact the people to your right and left, and their actions impact people to their right and left. The different wonders also represent different ways of playing, and this is a game I always look forward to playing. It's not one I own, so I don't get to play it that often, but I'll never say no to it. Gloomhaven. Board Game Geek's #1 game, and it shot up quite a bit on my list this year because I've been playing it a bunch again. And that's mostly due to the digital version dropping. I love the card management system in the game, and all the interactions between the incredibly varied classes. An amazing amount of content comes with this game. And my previous criticism of the game has simply been, there's too much to it. It's such a time investment to play through that it's just been impractical until recently. So if you are someone who really wants to play Gloomhaven, but can't get a group together, and don't want to set it up for solo play all the way through, the digital adaptation is a really great way to enjoy this one. And with my interest renewed in the game, I'm really looking forward to Frosthaven now. Roll for the Galaxy. I like Race for the Galaxy, but I love Roll for the Galaxy, which is why it's one of my top rated games. Yet again, this is one where app play has influenced my decision because I've been playing the game on the app entirely too much, and it's burnt me out a little on it. Especially as one of the things I enjoy most about it is the tactile element of rolling dice. Still, Roll for the Galaxy is a great, fast-paced, fast-moving dice allocation game where luck really has little to do with it. A good player's gonna beat a poor player regardless of what dice they roll. Gaia Project. Gaia Project has everything I love in a game. It's science fiction themed, it's got deep engine building, it's got multiple paths to victory, and it has near endless replayability, with all the different factions and interactions, and the different decisions you can make each time you play. Another one of those games though I wish I could play a lot more often than I get to, as an awful lot of my gamer friends find this one rather intimidating. Argent the Consortium. This wacky worker placement game takes place in a magical college. The chancellor of the university has disappeared, and you're one of the leading faculty members trying to claim their job. And it's a worker placement game where you can throw fireballs into rooms, have your apprentices attack other apprentices, and generally wield powerful magic and blow shit up while still playing a worker placement game. And I think it's just really clever, really different, and a worker placement game that allows you to be something other than passive-aggressive. Xia, Legends of the Drift System. This is a space sandbox game where you are a rookie captain who's just picked up their first rust bucket ship, and it's a big wide space sector where you can become a pirate, a trader, an archaeologist, a courier, or any number of different jobs. The great thing about Xia is that you can just bimble about doing whatever, and while you're doing that, you're having a lot of fun in the process. This is really not a game to be taken too seriously, and I think the groups that will get the most out of it are the ones that treat it as a sandbox to play in, rather than a competitive fight to the death. Mansions of Madness, 2nd edition. An example of how to do app integration. This game uses an app in the place of a dungeon master or storyteller, and it allows you to get a sense of exploration as you play through the missions. Probably the best of the Lovecraft games out at the moment, and one I've gone all in on, collecting all of the expansions for. I'm really looking forward to getting the sound system set up in the Wharekemu, so I can pump the narrative and sound effects through while we play. Also very high on my list of games to finish off painting, Azul. Azul is the tile laying game about laying tiles, and while it may seem like a bit of a generic abstract, there's just something about the tile selection system in it and the interactions between players that makes this game really cutthroat and an absolute brain burner. Wasn't a huge fan of Azul 2, but I strongly suspect Azul 3 will be on this list next year. Twilight Struggle. When I first started this list, this was my #1 game, and now it's fallen to number 16. And the reason for that is twofold. One, there's another game coming up which does a lot of what Twilight Struggle does, but I enjoy it a bit more now. And two, many of the last times I've played, it's ended in an accidental DEFCON victory, and that always feels hollow. It's still an exceptional game, and the way the card interactions and card management systems work are still absolutely brilliant. But I just feel when I win through a DEFCON, it just feels hollow. And that hollow feeling's knocked a little bit of the shine off it. Block by Block, the Insurrection game. Another pandemic-inspired co-op firefighting game, but this time it's focused on civil disobedience and urban insurrection. The blocks have had enough and they're not going to take it anymore. Some games are obliquely political, and a lot of economic games just reinforce capitalist values. Profit is good, profit is how you win. Block by Block is an intensely political game with a very strong message, and I really respect how upfront it is about that. Also an incredibly topical game given the amount of urban unrest across the US in the last year or so. I believe there's a new edition coming out soon because this one's currently out of print. Yokohama, the biggest mover on this list, jumping up 32 spots. That's because the more I play it, the more I fall in love with Yokohama. It just feels different. It uses so many traditional Eurogamer mechanics, but they're just implemented in a different way, creating a special experience. I love how you have to plan out your turns. I love all the different options on the board. And I love the multiple paths to victory in Yokohama. If you are a Eurogame fan and you have not tried this one, definitely check it out. It's one of those games that gets better and better the more you play it. Obsession. Steph's favorite game and one of my favorites too. One thing that makes a big difference for me in games is ludonarrative consistency. And that's the idea that the mechanics and the theme are interconnected and interrelated. Nothing you do in the game feels like it's there because it's just a game. It makes sense because of the thematic framework, and Obsession is a masterclass in that. Every action feels embedded in the world of Obsession. This is a very, very tight Eurogame, and it requires severe action optimization to win. Underwater cities. So many people have said to me, oh, you love Terraforming Mars, you'll absolutely love Underwater Cities. And how absolutely right they are. Just about all the things I love in Terraforming Mars are in Underwater Cities, but done in a different way. The two games are mechanically quite different, but they scratch such a similar itch of using technological projects, building a complex engine, and spreading out across a world. In Underwater Cities' case, it's building your underwater empire. Another game that just keeps growing and growing on me the more I play it. This War of Mine, a profoundly powerful and awe-inspiring game where you decide the fate of a group of survivors during a siege. In terms of pure narrative experience, this War of Mine stands head and shoulders above all other story games. Because it's not a fantasy romp. It's not a light-hearted adventure. There's a grim realism here. And it's that attempt to make a board game that deals with a serious topic and deals with it in an incredibly confronting and personal way that makes this War of Mine one of those games you really should play, even if it's just the once, just to experience it. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a fun game, and you'll have a great time playing it, but it will leave its mark on you. Well, unless you're one of those sociopaths who plays a game and goes, why can't I kill everyone and take their stuff? We start off the top 10 with my favorite worker placement game, Anachrony. Now, there's a lot to love about Anachrony, even if it does come in a ridiculously large box these days. And what I really do love about it is that it's just an interesting worker placement game, where you have to manage your resources really closely. You have 4 rounds until an apocalypse happens, and then a couple of turns after that where you can tidy up your stuff, but they're not very productive. And it's all about maximizing the limited actions you have in that very short space of time. This is a game that obviously I've got the big box and I've got the fully blinged out kit and stuff for, but more importantly, I took the time to paint all of the figures in this one. I think the power suit figures, while they are an optional extra and you don't need them to play, they really are just kind of cool. And I was very pleased to get these painted, all done up, and boxed away. Why Anachrony endures as one of my favorite games is hard to put a finger on. To a lot of people, it will appear to be just an overproduced, yet reasonably competent worker placement game. And yet its specific configuration of actions, paths to victory, and its quirky little idiosyncrasies like the time displacement system, and that you have to power up your power suits to use certain spots, just makes it a game that each and every time I enjoy immensely. Number 9, Brass Birmingham. A game I originally expected not to like at all, yet somehow this one's got under my skin, and not only that, it's got under the skin of my gaming groups as well. Brass is a deceptive beast. When you initially look at it, you think, oh, it's a train game. And having played some of Martin Wallace's other train games, I wasn't hugely impressed. I didn't mind Australia, but that kind of fell under my I like gonzo games that are a little bit over the top rule. I played his iconic Steam and it just left me kind of cold. But Brass Birmingham is a game of opportunism. It's not really a train game. There are very limited actions in the game and you have to do the best thing you have with the cards you have in hand. What this means is my group that doesn't normally like Euros has jumped on this one, because it's a game where you don't have to sit and plan out everything you're going to do for the whole game. No, you see a good opportunity, you jump on it, and you maximize that opportunity. And I think that feature of Brass Birmingham is why it's appealed so much to me and my group. It's not actually a boring train game, it just pretends that it is. Number 8 is Paths of Glory, the World War II card-driven war game. Paths of Glory is in many ways a spiritual predecessor to Twilight Struggle. And if you've played Twilight Struggle, a lot of the systems will seem very familiar to you. Each turn you'll play an action card, and you can use that action card for operations points or for its event. And this is the system that was tweaked and modified to be part of Twilight Struggle. But where it draws me in is its sheer scale and scope. This is a game about the First World War, but it's not a game on rails. You can start off with an offensive through the Low Countries and into France, fight on the Eastern Front, and then the war expands with battles across the Italian, Austrian front. Then you can open up a front in Romania. The Serbs can get involved. It's messy, it's chaotic, it's a great game about the First World War. And don't get me wrong, this game does not romanticize the First World War in any way, shape, or form. Quite the contrary. It's a game where attacking is painful, but frequently the game forces you, for political reasons, to attack. And the different theaters all across the board also open up different things. The Western Front is largely static, but a big breakthrough there is hugely important, whereas the Eastern Front is a lot more dynamic. Large forces are involved in both those fronts, but much smaller forces fight down around Turkey or in the Balkans. And you only get 6 actions a turn. And yeah, you can get multiple operations points, but you have to split them across up to a dozen theaters. This is a super deep, fantastic 2-player experience. And if you are a fan of Twilight Struggle and you want something more, I recommend taking this next step up. Next up is a game that's marketed as a trader game, but it can be an exceptionally good co-op game as well, and that is Nemesis. And I'm really looking forward to whenever Nemesis Lockdown finally turns up. Let's be brutally honest, Nemesis is the Alien game. It's a better Alien game than any Alien game that's come out, which is kind of amazing and kind of frustrating at the same time. But I guess it gave them some flexibility to be more inventive with the monsters, to play to the tropes, but not be locked into the IP. This is the next game I've got to paint, and I've started doing this one, but I have a long way to go on this. I really want a fully painted copy of Nemesis. Get these little spuggly things looking awesome. I think that'd be really neat. Of course, the desire to paint comes and goes, so we'll see how that all shakes out. But why Nemesis is so cool for me is that sense of exploring the ship, where there are nasty gribbles that are going to drop out at you. And it doesn't overwhelm you with gribbles. Each game there's going to be, a half a dozen aliens on board the ship, but they're tough, they're dangerous. You should probably run from them. And the traitor element, I think, is overblown. It's an opt-in traitor game. You can choose to be a scumbag, or you can choose to be aligned with the crew. That's a choice you as a player make at a point during the game. And I think the game works really well when most of the players are playing relatively cooperatively. And there's just a hint of being a traitor. When everyone's a traitor, the game kind of comes off its rails and turns into a slapstick affair. And if you're teaching this to new players, play it co-op first. It's really hard to play a game like this with a traitor mechanic, where it's actually really hard to do direct damage to people if you don't know the systems reasonably well. And it's perfectly fine as a co-op. Anyway, a great game, one that I'm really glad I've got everything for it, and definitely a game that's been taking Battlestar Galactica's spot in our rotation lately. Next up is War of the Ring 2nd Edition. Although technically, this is a 1st edition box. Doesn't really matter. I'd say no, the editions are pretty damn close. 1st edition's the one I've got, but I'm just as happy to play 2nd edition. War of the Ring tells the story of Lord of the Rings. It's a grand strategy game, a big, sweeping, epic affair. But its secret sauce is that it's character-driven. The actions of the Fellowship have a huge impact on the game. And it's also part of the 2 ways you can win. You can either win with a military victory, or you can win by dunking the ring. And the reverse is true for Sauron. He can win by corrupting the ring bearer, or basically wiping the free people off the map. I've spent a lot of time painting this game. Lots of different figures and stuff down here. I've got the expansion that came out, so that's Galadriel. And I even begged a spare copy of the Aragorn figure so I could have a Strider figure and an Aragorn the King crown figure. Even made a little crown using some Milliput and painting it up. That's an indicator of how much I really like this game. The reason I haven't got a 2nd edition copy is because I've painted all of 1st edition and it just seemed a little excessive to buy a new one and try and paint that, because this took forever. Why War of the Ring is such a good game for me is the storytelling that comes with it. It's a game where it can play out differently. It's not on rails. My favorite game of all time of War of the Ring was where I took the Haradrim, bypassed Gondor, went through the Gap of Rohan, and sacked the Grey Havens. There were elephants in the Shire, and it was glorious. It's another 2-player game, and another one that takes a lot of time, but hugely rewarding when you get into it. Next up is my favorite hidden traitor game, Battlestar Galactica. And this has been one of my group's favorite games for an incredibly long time. Few games generate better stories than Battlestar Galactica, and the culture of our games are such that people are accusing each other of being Cylons before the loyalty cards are even dealt. I like this one so much that I fully painted it up, even mounting the little Vipers on bases. And not only that, I made a fan expansion, which has like some of the characters that are Cylons in the show, spoilers, as their non-Cylon personas. That got a bunch of downloads, so I'm pretty pleased with that. That was 13 years ago, I think I made that. And that's the great thing about Battlestar Galactica. My group's been playing it since whenever it came out, maybe 2008. And we've enjoyed the heck out of it that entire time. Now, will Unfathomable push it off the shelf? Pretty unlikely. I've got no huge interest in getting Unfathomable. I'll play it if it comes along, but it's a Battlestar Galactica replacement. I've got the original. I've got all the expansions for the original. I've painted them all up. I don't really see the need for it personally. It's just a pity that the original game had to go out of print. But I guess we'll find out. When I do finally get around to playing it, I'll see if it has improvements. And you never know, it could actually knock this one off its pedestal. Next up is Thunderbirds, by Matt Lecoq, who designed Pandemic. So when I talk about firefighting pandemic type games, I think Thunderbirds is the best of them. And I think it's one of those great tragedies that because Thunderbirds as an IP is not very well known outside the British Commonwealth, it didn't do very well, because it's an excellent game. I just happen to have grown up with the Thunderbirds, so all of the connections in the game make sense. But mechanically, it's a heck of a lot of fun. And that's because it's a co-op that requires planning. You need the right equipment in the right place at the right time with the right people. which means on your turn, you might just be ferrying people so that someone else can pick those pieces up and do the action in a later turn. Or you might drop stuff up in one location and move on to another so another player can sweep by, pick something up, and use it later as well. There's a lot of foreplanning and a lot of prioritization needed in this game. And the teams that do well are the teams that trust their expertise, coordinate their crews really well, and remember that the game's not about stopping all the disasters. They're a bit of a smokescreen to keep you away from the actual game objective, which is defeating the Hood. If you can track down a copy of Thunderbirds for a reasonable price, and you do like cooperative games, and especially if you like that pandemic-style firefighting co-op, you can do a lot worse than Thunderbirds. It's excellent. And if you can get it, get the Tracy Island expansion. It kind of completes the game. Number 3, Star Wars Rebellion. Now, everything I said about War of the Rings 2nd Edition pretty much applies for Star Wars Rebellion as well. Aside from it's Star Wars and not Lord of the Rings. One could argue the two games occupy the same game space. That is, that it's a two-player head-to-head game where you're reenacting a classic war from a fictional setting. Of course, one's got Oliphants and one's got Star Destroyers. And the game you prefer probably depends on which of these settings you prefer as well. Another game where I took the time to paint all of the figures in the game, and you know, I'm really pleased that I did that, because when Star Wars Rebellion is set up on the table with painted pieces, it looks absolutely wonderful. And like War of the Ring, it reenacts the war without it being on rails. The rebel base is not always on Dantooine. It's not always on Hoth even. In fact, you can put that rebel base pretty much anywhere that is in Coruscant. And the cat and mouse element between the vastly superior Empire player with a huge amount of resources and the rebels desperately fighting for time and trying to keep their base hidden. It's just fantastically tense and a bit of a chess match, and I think that is what makes it a better game for me than War of the Ring, is the search for the rebel base. That shifting objective, that tension that every time the Empire moves, the rebel player's like, they're getting a little closer. But the Empire player's going, where the hell are they? They could be there, they could be there, they could be there. And that back and forth goes throughout the whole game. And I've played very few games that have had as many climactic and tense endings as Star Wars Rebellion. Number 2, Terraforming Mars. This was going to be my number 1 game this year until something else happened, but I still love Terraforming Mars, and it's been the number 2 game on my list for the last 4 years running. And the same things that appeal to me then appeal to me now. It's an engine builder with almost unlimited potential. There's just so much you can do with your engine, and you get to play with your engine through the game. A lot of engine builders sort of fall over and finish as soon as you really kick off, but Terraforming Mars gives you the opportunity to use that engine to do cool stuff. And then there's all the little sub-engines you can build using floaters and animals and microbes. There's a pile of different corporations, and if you want to check out my thoughts on Terraforming Mars corporations and how different they are, I've done a deep dive video on that where I go through and I tier rank all of them. Well, all of the ones I've played. But still, Terraforming Mars, despite its ugly art, despite its slightly crappy pieces, it's the game that matters. And Terraforming Mars delivers game in spades for me. And the number 1 game on my list for the 3rd year running is Spirit Island. And I said before that it might have fallen off my list if not for one thing. And that one thing was Jagged Earth. Can I just say, this is a fantastic expansion. It's rare that you get an expansion that isn't full of bloat, that isn't have some chaff that you can throw out. A lot of the Battlestar Galactica expansions I don't really use much of. Even the Star Wars Rebellion one has like a couple of leaders that I'm like, who's ever going to pick these? Oh, and War of the Ring 1st Edition has like the worst expansion where you get like 4 bits that are good and the rest of it you throw in a box. No, Jagged Earth is just this super strong expansion full of really cool spirits that just, I just keep getting staggered on how he can keep making spirits that are unique, interesting, and innovative. There's 24 of them now, and they don't really double up. The old reasons for why I like the game are still here. It's a co-op game in a setting that is not unfamiliar to me. An island that was being colonized, like the island I live on that was colonized. And it leans into the values of Kaitiakitanga, which is Te Reo Maori for stewardship and guardianship. An idea that spirits used to watch over places. And nowadays, people like conservation rangers are called kaitiaki because their job is stewardship, their job is guardianship, stopping the land from being defiled and desecrated. And Spirit Island is all about that. It's about holding back a tide of corruption, of assembling your gang of kick-ass spirits and punting those invaders off the island. And I absolutely, truly love the damn thing. Well, that's the end of the list. I hope you enjoyed it. If there are any games you think I would really like based on what you've seen here, let me know in the comments. If there's any games where you're like, yeah, you're dreaming, that game's terrible, I don't really want to know about that. But if you've got examples of games you think do things better than the ones I've put here, let me know those in the comments. And a reminder that 3 Minute Board Games does not do paid content. Keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the notification button, subscribe to the channel, check out our store, and share it as widely as you can. Every little bit helps. And until next time, take care.